What happened when an undercover CEO stepped into his own bank, only to uncover a massive fraud operation right under his nose? Welcome back, brilliant viewers. Today's story is about deception, power, and justice. When CEO Daniel Carter disguises himself as a regular customer, what should have been a routine withdrawal turns into a shocking nightmare. Denied access to his own account and falsely accused of fraud, he soon realizes something much bigger is at play. Join us as we unravel a thrilling investigation, an epic takedown, and the fight to restore trust. You won't want to miss this. Elliot Graves had spent years shaping Crescent Federal Credit Union into a trusted institution, a place where customers felt safe knowing their finances were handled with care. He had built its foundation on integrity, prioritizing customer service, and ethical banking. Under his leadership as COO, Crescent Federal grew into one of the most respected credit unions in the region, offering fair loan terms, excellent service, and a customer-first approach. But lately, things had begun to change. Over the past 6 months, Elliot had noticed a troubling trend. Customer complaints were rising, employee morale was sinking, and financial discrepancies were becoming more frequent. The board had expressed concern over the bank's declining reputation, and internal reports showed that customer satisfaction scores were at an all-time low. While some blamed staffing shortages or operational inefficiencies, Elliot suspected there was something deeper at play. He had always believed that a company's culture reflected its leadership, and if Crescent Federal was struggling, then something or someone was eroding its values from the inside. The more Elliot dug into the reports, the more uneasy he became. Accounts were being flagged for fraud at an alarming rate, yet very few investigations led to real identity theft. Loan approvals were inconsistent, with some customers denied for no apparent reason, while others were approved for large sums under suspicious conditions. Employees who had once been enthusiastic about their work now seemed overworked and disengaged. And yet, when Elliot raised these concerns in leadership meetings, his senior managers dismissed them as minor anomalies. Elliot wasn't convinced. He knew that numbers could be manipulated, reports could be polished, and excuses could be made, but real customer experiences didn't lie. If he wanted the truth, he would have to see it for himself. That's when he decided to go undercover. Creating the alias of Elliot Preston, a local contractor, he set up a genuine account at Crescent Federal, complete with identification and banking history. His plan was simple: walk into one of his own branches and experience firsthand what everyday customers faced. He expected to find inefficient processes, maybe even lazy employees, but what he discovered was far worse than he could have ever imagined. Elliot stepped into the bustling downtown branch of Crescent Federal Credit Union, blending in with the late afternoon crowd. The bank, which once prided itself on exceptional service, now felt cold and transactional. The lobby lacked the warmth he had envisioned when he first helped establish Crescent Federal. Tellers worked robotically, their greetings half-hearted, while customers shifted impatiently in long lines. Elliot took his place in the queue, silently observing. He wasn't expecting luxury, just basic professionalism, but as he watched a customer ask a simple question, only to be brushed off with an exasperated sigh, he felt the first flicker of unease. When it was his turn, he approached teller station 3, where a woman named Kara Bennett sat behind the counter, her eyes glued to the screen in front of her. "Next," she muttered, without looking up. Elliot gave her a polite smile. "Good afternoon. I'd like to withdraw $500 from my checking account." He slid his ID and bank card across the counter. Kara barely glanced at him as she swiped his card and typed in his account details. Within seconds, her expression changed. Her eyebrows furrowed and she stiffened in her seat. "Sir, I'll need you to wait here for a moment," she said, her tone suddenly clipped and professional. Without another word, she reached for her phone and whispered something to the manager standing across the room. Elliot felt a prickle of unease. This wasn't how simple transactions were supposed to go. Within moments, Nathan Cross, the branch manager, appeared behind Kara, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Preston, would you mind stepping into my office? We have some issues with your account that need to be discussed." Elliot played along, nodding as he followed Cross across the lobby. He could feel the eyes of employees and customers on him, their hushed murmurs filling the space. Something was very wrong. Inside the glass-walled office, Cross wasted no time. "Mr. Preston, are you aware that you have multiple outstanding business loans with Crescent Federal, totaling over $3,800,000? Elliot froze. "What?" he said sharply. "That's impossible. I've never taken out a loan with this bank." Cross turned the computer screen toward him, showing the documents, loan agreements, deposit records, even transactions signed under his alias. The signatures matched perfectly. The paperwork was flawless. "You're in serious legal trouble, Mr. Preston," Cross said, his voice ice-cold. "And if this is fraud, we will prosecute to the fullest extent." Elliot's blood ran cold. Someone inside his own bank was orchestrating fraud on an unimaginable scale, and now they had set him up as their perfect fall guy. Elliot sat frozen in Nathan Cross's office, staring at the fraudulent loan documents. His name was on everything: the applications, the approvals, even the repayment schedules. The worst part? The signatures looked exactly like his own. He had seen identity theft before, but this was something else. This was an inside job. "I never approved these loans," Elliot said, his voice controlled but firm. "This is fraud." Cross didn't flinch. "That's not what the system shows," he replied, pushing a stack of papers toward him. "Multiple loans, multiple approvals, all under your name. The total amount, over $3,800,000. Elliot leaned forward, studying the documents. Whoever forged them knew exactly how the bank's internal verification systems worked. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a calculated operation. "I want to speak to someone from upper management," Elliot demanded. "No," Cross smirked. "That won't be necessary. Your accounts are already being frozen. If you have a lawyer, I suggest you call them." Elliot clenched his jaw. This was deliberate. Someone inside Crescent Federal had not only stolen millions, but had also used him as a scapegoat. He needed to act fast. As the conversation escalated, Elliot noticed two security guards outside the glass-walled office, their eyes trained on him. This was a setup. He had been pushed into the role of a criminal, and now they were preparing to eject him from his own bank. If he protested too hard, they might even call the police. For now, he had no choice but to play along. "I'll take care of this," Elliot said coolly, standing up. He gathered the documents, slipping them into his jacket. "Thanks for your time." Cross narrowed his eyes. "I wouldn't leave town if I were you." Elliot walked out of the office, feeling the weight of dozens of stares. He ignored them and exited into the crisp evening air. As soon as he was outside, he pulled out his phone and dialed his most trusted confidant, Maya Sullivan, his longtime executive assistant. "Maya," he said, the moment she picked up, "we have a serious problem." He explained everything in short, clipped sentences. When he finished, Maya's voice was sharp. "This isn't just fraud, Elliot. Someone inside the bank is pulling the strings, and they've set you up to take the fall." Elliot's grip tightened around the phone. "Find out who authorized these loans," he said. "We're going to expose every single person involved." As he ended the call, Elliot realized something chilling. This scheme had been going on for months, maybe even years, and now he was at the center of it. Elliot wasted no time. Back at his private office, Maya had already begun digging into Crescent Federal's internal systems. As his most trusted assistant, she had access to privileged data, and what she uncovered was worse than either of them had imagined. "Elliot," Maya said, her fingers flying across the keyboard, "this fraud is bigger than just you. I've traced at least $95 million in questionable loans issued in the past 18 months, and the patterns are the same. Fake approvals, forged signatures, and the money disappearing into a network of offshore accounts." Elliot leaned over the screen, scanning the transaction records. Each loan had been processed under a different high-credit customer's name, just like what had happened to him. These were people who wouldn't regularly check their accounts for loans they never took out. Small business owners, wealthy retirees, even long-time bank investors. And at the center of it all, the approvals always come back to a select group of senior loan officers, Maya continued. Every one of these fraudulent transactions was rubber-stamped by the same 5 people across multiple branches. Elliot exhaled sharply. That meant this wasn't just an opportunistic scam, it was a systematic operation within the bank itself. Maya clicked into another screen. But here's where it gets really interesting. She pulled up a file labeled High Risk Overrides. Elliot's stomach dropped as he saw his own authorization code attached to dozens of the fake loans. "They've been using your executive credentials, Elliot," Maya said grimly. "Any time a loan hit a certain risk threshold, they used your clearance to push it through. That's why no red flags were raised. The system thought these were legitimate approvals from the CEO himself." Elliot clenched his fists. Someone had been forging his identity to approve millions in fraudulent loans, making sure that if this ever came to light, all fingers would point directly at him. "Who else has access to my credentials?" he asked. Maya hesitated, then pulled up a list. Elliot's pulse pounded as he saw the names. Among them was Gerald Whitaker, the bank's chief financial officer. "Whitaker?" Elliot's voice was sharp. He had trusted the man for over a decade. "He's covering his tracks well," Maya admitted. "But he's the only one with the level of access needed to manipulate these approvals without raising suspicion." Elliot's jaw tightened. If Whitaker was involved, that meant this fraud went straight to the top of Crescent Federal. And if Elliot wanted to take him down, he needed undeniable proof. Before Whitaker made him the fall guy for everything. Elliot knew that simply confronting Whitaker wouldn't be enough. The CFO was a seasoned manipulator. He'd deny everything, bury any remaining evidence, and spin the narrative to make Elliot look like the real criminal. If Elliot wanted to expose him, he needed a plan that forced Whitaker to incriminate himself. "We have to make him think the system is still working in his favor," Elliot murmured, pacing his office. "If he believes nothing is wrong, he'll keep approving fraudulent loans." Maya, already a step ahead, turned her laptop around. "I've set up a dummy loan request, a fake business under a real high-credit customer's name. If Whitaker and his people process it, we'll be able to track where the money goes." Elliot scanned the application. The fake business, Atlas Capital Holdings, looked legitimate on paper, registered under a shell company with all necessary documents in place. But the account receiving the loan was under Elliot's control, monitored in real time. "You're sure they'll take the bait?" Elliot asked. Maya nodded. "I've mirrored their usual patterns. The loan amount is set at $600,000. Big enough to matter, but not so big that it triggers external audits." Elliot exhaled. "Submitted." Within hours, the trap was set. The fraudulent loan request was processed through Crescent Federal's internal system, landing on Whitaker's desk for approval. The waiting game began. The next morning, Maya's eyes widened as an alert popped onto her screen. "They did it," she whispered. "They approved the loan." Elliot moved beside her, watching as the money was wired to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. But the most crucial detail? The approval had Whitaker's digital signature on it. "We have him," Maya said triumphantly. But Elliot wasn't ready to celebrate yet. Not enough. He could still blame an underling, claim ignorance. "We need him on record admitting to the entire operation." That's when he made the riskiest decision yet. "I'm meeting him face to face." Maya's head snapped up. "Elliot, that's dangerous. If he suspects anything—" "He won't," Elliot interrupted. "He still thinks I'm in the dark. And I'll make sure he keeps thinking that, right up until the moment he seals his own fate." With the evidence piling up, all that remained was trapping Whitaker in his own lies. And Elliot was ready to watch him fall. Elliot arrived at the private club where he had arranged to meet Whitaker. The atmosphere was refined, dim lighting, expensive whiskey, and men in tailored suits discussing business deals that made or broke fortunes. Whitaker, sitting in a leather armchair, looked every bit the confident executive, completely unaware that his empire of lies was seconds away from collapse. Elliot sat down across from him, placing his phone on the table, recording discreetly. He leaned forward, adopting the tone of an exhausted CEO. "I know about the loans, Whitaker, and I know about the offshore accounts." Whitaker barely flinched, swirling his drink in his glass. "Elliot, you really need to relax. You've been running yourself ragged. Let me guess, you saw some irregularities, a few transactions that don't add up." He smirked. "That's business, my friend." Elliot kept his face neutral. "I just need to know one thing," he said, lowering his voice. "Are we protected?" Whitaker chuckled, mistaking Elliot's cautious tone for compliance. He leaned in, confidence oozing from his voice. "Of course we are. We have layers upon layers of redirection. We approve loans, filter them through accounts with perfect credit histories, move the money offshore, and if anyone asks," he took a sip of whiskey, "we blame system errors. And if that doesn't work, well, that's what scapegoats are for." Elliot clenched his jaw. There it was, the confession he needed. But Whitaker wasn't done yet. "You think Crescent Federal runs on policies and customer trust?" Whitaker continued. "No, it runs on leverage. People at the top don't ask questions because they profit from it. Regulators don't dig too deep because we make sure they stay happy. And if a few employees notice something's off, we find a way to make them disappear." He raised an eyebrow. "Just ask Jenna." Elliot's stomach dropped. Jenna, a compliance officer who had mysteriously resigned 6 months ago, had likely been forced out when she got too close. How many others had been silenced? Elliot exhaled slowly, locking eyes with Whitaker. And if someone tried to stop it? Whitaker smirked. "Then they'd better have a damn good escape plan." Elliot pressed stop on his recording. Game over. Standing up, he adjusted his suit. "I appreciate the honesty, Whitaker, truly." Whitaker raised his glass. "That's what partners are for." Elliot turned to leave, his pulse hammering. Whitaker had just confessed to one of the biggest financial frauds in modern banking history. And now, Elliot had everything he needed to bring the entire corrupt system crashing down. The grand boardroom of Crescent Federal Bank was filled with the usual faces, executives in sharp suits, board members tapping their pens impatiently, and department heads scanning the agenda with bored expressions. At the head of the table, Elliot Hayes, now back in his usual commanding attire, stood tall, his face unreadable. The meeting had been called under the pretense of discussing financial projections, but Elliot knew that within minutes, the entire direction of the bank would shift. "Before we begin," Elliot started, his tone steady, "there's something important we need to address." He reached into his pocket and retrieved his phone, placing it on the table and tapping the screen. Whitaker's voice filled the room. "We approve loans, filter them through accounts with perfect credit histories, move the money offshore, and, if anyone asks, we blame system errors. And if that doesn't work, well, that's what scapegoats are for." Silence. The boardroom, once filled with rustling papers and murmurs of polite conversation, now felt suffocating. Whitaker, sitting near the middle of the table, turned pale. Elliot pressed another button. "You think Crescent Federal runs on policies and customer trust? No, it runs on leverage. Regulators don't dig too deep because we make sure they stay happy, and if a few employees notice something's off, we find a way to make them disappear. Just ask Jenna." A gasp came from one of the compliance officers. The CFO stiffened, the head of HR, who had approved Jenna's resignation, shifted uncomfortably. Elliot let the recording finish, then finally spoke. "This is the man you entrusted to oversee financial operations," he said, his voice sharp. "Whitaker and his network of insiders have been siphoning funds through fraudulent loans, blaming innocent customers and setting up a system where the bank itself was a criminal enterprise." Whitaker shot to his feet. "This is ridiculous," he spat, his voice shaking. "You're taking my words out of context." Elliot turned to the head of security. "Do we have confirmation?" The man nodded. "Our internal audit cross-referenced Elliot's findings. At least 1,200 fraudulent loans. Over $150 million laundered. Every transaction connects back to Whitaker and his associates." At that moment, the doors to the boardroom swung open and 2 federal investigators stepped inside. "Mr. Whitaker," one of them announced, "you are under arrest for financial fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy." As the corrupt executive was led away in handcuffs, Elliot turned back to the board. "Now, let's talk about how we can rebuild this bank the right way." With the corruption exposed and Whitaker in federal custody, Crescent Federal Bank stood at a crossroads. Elliot Hayes knew that rooting out fraud was just the beginning. Restoring trust was the real challenge. Over the next few weeks, every department was placed under scrutiny, and a full-scale internal audit led to the dismissal of over a dozen employees tied to the scheme. Several high-ranking executives, fearing legal repercussions, resigned before they could be investigated. But Elliott didn't see their departures as a loss. He saw them as necessary steps toward rebuilding. To truly reform the bank, Elliott implemented sweeping structural changes. The first move? A new compliance division that reported directly to the board, rather than being buried under layers of bureaucracy. He also launched a whistleblower protection program, ensuring that employees who raised concerns would be protected, not punished. "This bank will never turn a blind eye to fraud again," he declared in an all-staff meeting. "If something seems wrong, we'll listen and we'll act." The biggest change, however, came with customer restitution. Every falsely accused customer had their accounts reinstated, their credit scores repaired, and in some cases, substantial compensation for the financial stress they had endured. Elliott personally wrote letters of apology, refusing to let the bank hide behind faceless press statements. "A bank is nothing without the people who trust it," he reminded his team. Internally, a new leadership team was put in place, including several employees who had quietly resisted Whitaker's control. Among them was Jenna, the compliance officer who had been forced out. Elliott offered her position back, with a promotion. "You were trying to stop this before anyone else," he told her. "That's exactly the kind of leadership we need." As the weeks passed, the changes took root. Employees who had once feared retaliation now spoke openly about policies and improvements. Customers, once skeptical, began to return. Crescent Federal Bank, which had nearly collapsed under corruption, was now emerging stronger than ever. Standing in the newly renovated customer service center, Elliott looked around at the new era of leadership, accountability, and integrity taking shape. This wasn't just about fixing a bank. This was about proving that justice and trust could still win in the end. 6 months after exposing the fraud that nearly destroyed Crescent Federal Bank, the institution had undergone a remarkable transformation. Gone were the days of unchecked corruption, bureaucratic neglect, and misplaced trust in executives who prioritized profits over people. Under Elliott Hayes' leadership, Crescent Federal was no longer just a financial institution. It had become a symbol of accountability, reform, and customer-first banking. The changes were evident from the moment customers walked through the doors. The sterile, intimidating atmosphere had been replaced with transparency and accessibility. Employees who once feared for their jobs now worked with confidence, empowered to make ethical decisions. Teller stations had been redesigned to encourage conversation rather than rushed transactions, and a new customer advocacy program ensured that no account issue went unheard or unresolved. The financial reforms were just as groundbreaking. Crescent Federal implemented industry-leading fraud prevention measures, including multi-layered transaction verification, real-time customer alerts, and an independent oversight committee. The whistleblower protection program saw immediate success. Several employees had already flagged suspicious activities, leading to rapid intervention before issues could escalate. Most importantly, Crescent Federal had begun restoring its reputation among the very people it had once betrayed. Customers who had been falsely accused of fraud saw their accounts reinstated with full restitution, apologies, and compensation. Public trust, once shattered, was now slowly but steadily rebuilding. "It's not enough to fix what's broken," Elliott told his leadership team in a meeting. "We have to make sure it never happens again." To reinforce this commitment, Crescent Federal partnered with financial watchdogs and community groups to promote ethical banking practices industry-wide. Elliott even spoke at national banking summits about corporate responsibility, openly sharing how his bank had failed and how they had fought to make things right. As Elliott stood in the bank's newly remodeled branch, he watched a longtime customer shaking hands with a teller, thanking them for their help. A simple moment, but one that signified everything Crescent Federal had worked to achieve. This is what banking should be, Elliott thought to himself. The bank had been through scandal, betrayal, and near connection, but now it was stronger than ever, not just because of its financial health, but because it had finally remembered the real foundation of its success: trust. The story of Crescent Federal Bank's downfall and redemption teaches a powerful lesson about leadership, integrity, and accountability. At its core, it highlights how corruption can infiltrate even the most trusted institutions when greed and negligence replace ethical leadership. The bank's executives, blinded by personal gain and unchecked power, allowed fraudulent activities to thrive, harming both customers and employees. However, Elliot Hayes's undercover investigation proves that one person's determination can spark real change. Instead of accepting polished reports and empty reassurances, he chose to see the truth firsthand. By exposing the fraudulent schemes and standing up against corporate misconduct, he not only saved the bank, but also set a precedent for ethical banking practices. This story also underscores the importance of transparency and customer trust. Without them, financial institutions crumble under the weight of their own deception. The reforms at Crescent Federal show that true leadership isn't about protecting profits, it's about protecting people. Ultimately, the lesson is clear. Institutions thrive when integrity is prioritized, but they fall when greed takes control. In a world where trust is fragile, doing the right thing will always be the most valuable investment.